What's up everyone, welcome back to Just Finished Coding. This is part 1 of our object-oriented programming series on Python, so let's get right into it.
Just finished coding.
In this video, I'm going to be explaining to you what classes and objects are, and more importantly, I'm also going to be explaining to you why we need them and use them. So without further ado, let's get right into our program. Now this video is just an overview and I'm not going to be doing much coding in this video, but when I do start actually coding some stuff in, I just want to let you know that for this project I'm going to be using the PyCharm offline editor, but if you are more comfortable with an online editor or another offline editor, then you can feel free to use that. This isn't going to have any restrictions on the editor that you have to use. Now let me answer the question, why do we use classes and objects? And the simple reason, the one single reason why we do this is because most things can't be described by a single variable. Let's just take the example of a book. Now it's almost impossible to just describe an entire book with just one variable. Like sure, you can describe the characteristics of the book each with a variable, but you can't describe the entire book itself with just one variable. So for example, you could say the title is a string something, and then you could say the number of pages is an integer, then you could say the number of, or rather the thickness of the book is a float value, and so on. The list goes on. But what's important to realize is that we just can't assign one value to the entire book. So we just can't say book is equals to and have something really fitting on the right side of that equals to sign. And that is the real reason why we have classes in the first place. Classes are really just a way to simplify all of this and to make all of our life better. So the best way that I can think of to actually describe a class is like a prototype of a product. So think of yourself as a business owner and you have, let's just say, a software business where you distribute some kind of patented product. And what you initially do is to come up with a prototype or a blueprint of what you're actually going to distribute, and then you replicate this on and then keep sending it to people. So a class can be visualized as that first blueprint or the prototype that you initially made. Another way of thinking of a class is like a machine that has the potential to just go on producing an infinite number of identical clones. And that is what a class really does. Now, if you're asking the question, well, if a class is the prototype in the first example and a class is like a machine which can produce a lot of clones, then well, what exactly are the clones? What are the mass distributed products that are actually, getting replicated? And the answer to that question is they're called objects. And objects are what can be, replicated on and on with the help of a class. Now, a little bit earlier, I mentioned the fact that everything that cannot be represented by a variable, for example, a book, has a set of characteristics which can be represented by variables. Now, these, characteristics actually have a fancy name when we're dealing with classes and objects, and they're called the attributes of that particular class or object. And what attributes are just the characteristics in a class. There's nothing really so special about the term except that it's a fancy name or jargon that programmers like to use. Now till here I've always used the words identical and clones, but keep in mind that objects do not have to be always an exact copy of each other. You could have some things between objects that differ, and those things that differ actually have to be declared when we are actually initializing the object, and those things are called parameters. Now here's how you can write your own sample class. So the first line of code is always going to be class, all in lowercase letters, and then you're going to follow it with the name of your class. Now usually you may want to do that in capital letters just because that's standard to do that, and it's a normal convention, but there isn't really going to be any penalty in case you use lowercase letters. And there are actually quite a few classes which use lowercase letters, so you're free to name it whatever you want. I'm going to call it class book, and right after this you want to put an open and close parentheses. And inside this parentheses is where you specify the inheritance. And if you aren't going to inherit from anywhere, which is our case, and we'll get into what inheritance is in future tutorials, if you aren't going to inherit anywhere, you can leave it as it is, or you could just type in this word which says object. And this is going to make it a little violet color in PyCharm, or a different color in your editor, I don't know. But keep in mind that this is optional, but I just like to do it because it basically specifies that we aren't inheriting from anywhere. Right after those two parentheses, you want to add in a colon, just like you do so for functions, and then you want to click and enter, and automatically your editor should be indenting it to the next line. Now each and every class, well, almost each and every class, is going to have something called a def.init method. Now each class is going to have a set of methods inside of it, and methods are really a set of functions, but they are used inside classes, and they can only be used if we either have an object of the class, or if the method is something called a static method, which I will get into future tutorials. But keep in mind that each class has a set of methods that are unique to that class only. Now the main method of this is called the init method, okay, and that is responsible for initializing an object of the class. Now there are some classes which actually do not have this init method, but for most of your programming you will be using classes that have an init method, and in future tutorials I'll get into when you wouldn't want an init method in your class. But for now, just keep in mind that it's basically an essential method. So how you can basically set up the method is you say def first, and then you type in 2 underscores, and you want to follow that up with an init, and then right after that you want to put in 2 more underscores, and then right after that you want to type in an open and close parentheses, and inside that you want to type in a self. And this is pretty essential. So right after this, you start to type in all the parameters that you want to basically specify when you initialize the class. So this can be, I'm just going to go ahead and type in book author. Then we are going to have in, let's just say, I'm just going to rename that to something a little more easier. So I'm going to call that b underscore a for book author. Then I am going to have the number of pages, which is going to be NOP. So for number of pages, and let's just have that for now. So to initialize this, what you need to do is to have the following code. You want to type in self.x is not self.x, self.ba, or in our case, this is going to hold the book author, is equals to b underscore a, and then we are going to type in self.nop, or n underscore o underscore p, is equals to n underscore o underscore p. And now what this is going to do is it's going to give each object, okay, based on what we specify in the parameters, these 2 attributes, and each object can use these attributes however it likes. Let me give you an example. So I'm going to have a new method right here, and I'm going to call this method print out. Okay, so I'm just going to call it print out. There we are. And I'm going to have in basically nothing. And now for all your methods which you're going to have inside your class, you will want to have self as your first parameter, and do not delete this as at any cost, because this is what is going to specify which object is actually going to be calling out this method. And you'll understand why a little bit later on, but just keep in mind that you should have the self all the time. So now I'm going to call in this print out method, and what I'm going to do in this case is just print in our console. I'm going to print out string of what's that, BA, oh no, book author is already a string of NOP, and then we will also be, oh my god, I use capital letters for those, I'm sorry about that. So n underscore o underscore p, and right before that you want to type in self dot n underscore o underscore p, and that should basically remove all your errors. And then you can basically on your next line just have the exact same code, but you can just change this string and just call it self dot b underscore a, and this is going to ensure you print both of those. And you could type in a string of book author is this, but I'm just going to type in this just to make you understand what this method actually does. And a method is very much like a function. Just think of it that way for now. So now if we just have this, if we just call in this, nothing's going to really happen, and that's because we haven't actually initialized an object just as yet. And to initialize an object, here's what you need to do. Let's call that object B. So I'm going to say B is equals to book, and we are going to write book exactly the way we wrote it right here. And then we are going to have an open and close parentheses. And then here we're going to put in all the necessary parameters that we specified right here. So my book author, I'm going to call book author, let's just say, I'm just going to call it something random. I'm going to call it doctor, okay? And then right after that, I'm going to put in a comma. And then I'm going to specify n underscore o underscore p, which is the number of pages. And let's just say that's going to be 300. So that's pretty much it. Now I've initialized the object. And now what I can do is to actually basically call the methods using this object. So what I can do is just say b.printout, and this is going to make sure that all this stuff gets printed out. So I'm just going to leave in another space right here just to make our code look a little better, and there we are. So I'm going to save this program, and then I'm going to right click and click run. And now you can see in your console, you can see we have 300, which is the number of pages, and then we have book author, which is doctor, and that's pretty cool. Now here's where the advantages of classes really come into play. Now if you want to have another book and you did it in a normal non-object oriented way, what you'd have to do is to initialize a whole bunch of variables once again. But if you already have a class set up like this, what you can do is to just set up another book really quickly. So I'm going to set up another book called C, and now I can just say C is equals to book followed by an open and close parentheses followed by the two basically parameters which we'll specify. And the first parameter, I'm just going to call this book SS, okay, just like that. And then I'm going to set the number of pages to be like 200, and then I'm going to say c.printout, and now you can actually see that within our console we have basically all this stuff printed out exactly the way we actually specified it in this method. Now we can just change this method, and that is going to ensure that all our printouts actually change. So just by changing it in one place, we'd have it change everywhere, and that is pretty good, because now if we just made a mistake right here, for example, we just have to fix it here in case of an object-oriented programming approach. But if we actually made a mistake, while setting up all the variables and we did it in a non-object oriented approach, then we'd have to change it every single time we called out this method, and that's not exactly a good thing. So that's where, classes, all the more advantage actually comes into play. Before I wrap up this video, I do want to explain one more concept a little bit more in detail, and that is why we use this keyword called self. And self, what it really corresponds to is this object right here. So when we say self.ba, what we're really saying is whatever object you are using this method with, what we're going to do is to actually have a parameter initialized to that object, and we're going to make a new parameter called self.ba, and we are going to be setting that equals to whatever parameter the user is going to enter in that function, which is this one right here. So the self always corresponds to the object, and let's just take the example of the printout method. So right here, although we didn't really specify anything, and we seemingly have a parameter called self, what that self is really referring to is not anything within this parentheses. It's actually referring to the C right here. So that is in a nutshell why we use the self keyword. And in truth, there's actually a lot more we can do with classes, like inheritance, class methods, class variables, static methods, etc. But I don't want to overload too much in this video, so that's it we'll be doing for now. If you've enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave a like, and also don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.